The core of the Metro games is living, not just survival. It's always been about the people in the Metro trying to cope and the different ways that people do it, and the factions that have been created because of it. Some turn to a type of religion. I don't know, having this whale thing be your god seems a bit weird to me, but at least it sort of makes sense. It's the most powerful thing that those people have regular access to. Some return to their roots and live in the forest, and some turn to what has always been inside of them: cannibalism. And I love that Exodus ties all the factions to different gameplay types with different internal stories that is also related to the overarching narrative. Details and narrative gameplay synchronicity, the Metro series' specialty. And the main plot basically revolves around you doing, to a much smaller extent, what each of these factions have done. Carve out a place for yourself in the whole wide world. Maybe that parallel is completely accidental, but either way, I quite like the implications of that. Maybe Artyom, if he could actually speak, might have been a cult leader. Seems pretty funny to me. I also like how, even if that parallel is on purpose, 4A Games doesn't beat you over the dang head with it. If the main hero and the main villain really are so similar, then why the heck do you always feel the need to say, we're not so different, you and I? I hate that stupid cliche. Thankfully, the writing in the Metro series is better than that. And a quick little asterisk before I go more in depth onto Metro Exodus. It's not that well optimized. Even now, it's gotten better since launch for me personally. But if you basically don't have a NASA computer, I don't know if you'll be able to run Exodus on anything other than its lowest settings. Also, sometimes there's some weird glitches or problems with ragdoll physics, and the loading times are kinda ridiculous. All these technical issues can make Metro Exodus really unplayable occasionally. Just wanted to put that out there before I get into the actual game. So, the elephant in the room. This game doesn't take place in the Metro. Now, I know to some people who've been using the same sock since adolescence, change might be a little scary. But, as I'm sure you can tell from my extreme derision, I think that's incredibly stupid. The spirit of the Metro games, the crippling existentialism and the well-written characters coping with that is still alive and well as not making you feel like the chosen one unceremoniously bumbling your way to victory over whoever opposes you. No one will really know or care about you aside from the people aboard the Aurora. And there's no big Bond villain maniacally cackling about his evil plot for you to defeat either. The only real enemy is the slow decay of people's sanity. Speaking of the people in Exodus, the characters have been incredibly improved on since me teabagging one of my squad mates in Metro 2033. A big contributing factor are the facial animations. They aren't anything mind-blowing, but they're certainly serviceable and neither particularly add or take away from the immersion that Metro Exodus builds. They're fine. And believe me, fine is a definite improvement on Metro 2033 and Last Light. A complaint that I could see about the characters is that their backstory and characterization aren't exactly organic sometimes. You have to find out each character's backstory by, reading. But how the hell else could Exodus have brought it across? Hey, did you know I was kidnapped when I was 12 and watched my whole family be executed right in front of me? Yeah, I know, right? True story. That's not exactly organic storytelling either. And it's the fact that I actually enjoyed reading about each character's backstories. Yes, you heard me, I actually unironically read in a video game. While most of the characters are rather fleshed out, there is one exception. Anna, your wife, is still underdeveloped, and a large part of the story hinges on you being invested in her character, which has never really gotten any development, even across 2 games. Which is kind of baffling, because Colonel Miller, one of my favorite characters, is the polar opposite, which shows that 4A games do know how to make you invested in a character. Although, going back to Anna, the diary does give some nice context about Artyom and Anna, and there were significant improvements from Metro Last Light, like how Artyom and Anna were shown to be partners through the medium of gameplay, imagine that. And their relationship actually gets more than 5 minutes of screen time, but it's still not great. Despite this rather serious wrinkle, the characters are written incredibly honestly. The best way I can put it is, Metro Exodus' writing and voice acting is trying very hard to look like it's not trying very hard. Many people have a problem not with the dialogue or the character interactions, but with where those interactions are being delivered. What Exodus does is, instead of being trapped behind characters and basically being forced to go through the level at their pace and listen to their dialogue, though that does still happen now, most of the dialogue is delivered aboard the Aurora in basically a cutscene form. Some people don't like that, and I gotta say, on my second playthrough, it has gotten sort of annoying, but honestly, I prefer the full commitment to trapping the player in these types of cutscenes. As long as they're well written, I don't really mind. The only reason I bring this up is that it's different from the previous Metro games. Usually in those games, you're walking down a metro tunnel with some dude in a semi-convincing Russian accent expositing / world building at you. Which was perfectly fine. You had control and were free to screw around and try and jump on the NPC's head. But if Half-Life 2 taught me anything, it's that just because you technically have control doesn't make it not a cutscene. At the end of the day, this will just come down to a preference thing. Do you want to be robbed of control and have the developers force the experience they want you to have down your throat? Or do you want the illusion of control and be able to ruin whatever scene you're taking part in? Me, personally, I like having the experience that the developers want you to have. Also, talking about cutscenes and characters, I gotta say, the fact that Artyom doesn't speak is so ridiculous now that it's actually kinda hilarious. There's this scene in this place, trying not to spoil it, where a bad guy is threatening to make Artyom talk, and I was just chuckling like, yeah, good luck with that, buddy. The fans have been trying to do that since 2033. Like, legitimately, how is Artyom even married now? He had to have talked at some point. And the worst part is, he still talks during loading screens. Whatever. Speaking of which, the loading screens are actually pretty great. Weird compliment, I know, but they made the rather obscene loading times somewhat bearable. The excellent writing is present even in that part of the game. I loved hearing what Artyom thought about the world around him. It shows that he could maybe be a half-decent protagonist if he ever just opened his mouth. It's a shame that there are only so many loading screens with unique, non-repeating dialogue. It's just a minor thing, but minor things can make the biggest difference, and it could have almost completely negated my earlier criticism of how long the game takes to load in. But once you do load in, the gosh dang views alone are worth it. I usually make it a point to not talk about graphics, and I still won't. But the presentation and attention to detail is absolutely incredible, regardless of raw graphical power. Little details, the chip bits of paint on the oars, the caking of dirt on your guns, the friggin' hand animations, man. But I am worried that even a graphical and technical marvel like this game will get left in the dust because of how rapidly video games are progressing. Probably just me being weird, but still. Some games like Wind Waker or Persona 5 are timeless because of their art styles, but in 10, 20 years, who's to say we won't look at Metro Exodus and say, dang, I can't believe we used to think that looked good. This isn't really a criticism of Metro Exodus, it just annoys me that video game developing has essentially become about who can make the games that came out before them irrelevant the fastest. One thing that I doubt will ever become outdated though is the sound design. And I've been teasing y'all for a while, but I'm done now. I'm making this channel into a Metro ASMR channel. Daily uploads. The acoustics are some next level stuff. I literally bought headphones with surround sound just so I could appreciate it. Like, just listen. If anyone is wondering why I basically fetishize sound design at this point, it's because it's such an important part of a game's world, especially a game like Metro Exodus that expects you to take it seriously and feel a connection to not only the characters in it, but the environments too. So if the weapons don't sound convincing, if the ambient noise doesn't help the atmosphere and fit with the aesthetic of the area, if the game noises don't sound authentic, the immersion falls apart for me. But that's all really irrelevant because Metro Exodus has some incredible sound design. Also, speaking of sound, I sort of half-heartedly criticized the previous Metro game soundtrack for being exactly what I'd expect from a post-apocalyptic game, but listen to this for a second. Now listen to this. One of those pieces was from Doom 2016, and the other is from Metro Exodus. Bonus points for anyone who can tell me which is which, but my point is, it shows how many diverse tracks there are in Exodus. There is the usual atmospheric stuff, but with songs like this. Who cares if the relatively generic stuff is still there? Blah 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 blah, transition into gameplay. It's the fairly standard shoot things with the guns until the things die. I only really have one problem, which is that if Metro Exodus wants you to take care of your weapons and clean them to maintain their accuracy, that's perfectly fine. But even if before you clean them, you don't miss any shots that matter, then what's even the point of cleaning them? Or you miss some ridiculous shots, sorry I lost all my footage of this, but both of these are literally against the system that Metro Exodus itself tries to create. It completely eliminates the need to maintain your weapons, as it practically invalidates the need to clean that weapon. If no matter how clean or dirty your weapon is, you still miss and hit practically the same amount of shots, then what's the point of cleaning the weapon? But that's the only complaint that I feel 100% secure in leveling against Metro Exodus's gunplay, which is as good as ever, with each weapon feeling distinct and unique. I'm glad that the workbenches allow you to switch between almost any previously unlocked weapon and modification at will, so I could try out as many as I wanted. In regards to the ammunition for your guns though, the Metro series usually tries to make you be careful about how many things you shoot, and this one is no exception. Although I did always have plenty of ammunition, but I always do because I make it a point to explore almost everything to ensure I don't miss something. And I don't know if it's really fair of me to criticize the Metro series based off of some experience that not everyone will have. And it makes sense from a game designer standpoint that the total amount of ammunition you would find in the world is more than you will ever need, as plenty of players will just ignore everything and rush through the game. But the reason I'm even bringing up this disparity in how much ammo you have, which will directly correlate to the intensity of the combat, is because it's a direct result of Exodus's open world design. There will be players like me who, the second they have any freedom, they'll explore anything in sight and get quickly sidetracked, and will find most of the optional stuff before they really should. Which is why I always ended up having ammunition to spare for all my guns. Whereas in the previous Metro games, due to their linearity, the developers could put barely enough ammo with little extra weapons or upgrades off the beaten path, knowing that there wasn't really any way to sequence break or stockpile too much ammunition. Well, Metro 2033 did. I won't air my grievances with the Last Light's ammunition distribution in this video, because I already did it in a previous video. Shameless self-promotion, I know. Speaking of grievances, I'm gonna do my obligatory nitpick sections, where I harp on problems that I didn't really care about, but I feel obligated to mention because someone else might care. It's rather annoying how in previous games, everything to do with looting was bound to E, even taking the ammunition from enemies' guns, but now you just have to hold R, and you have to hold E to enter the levels from the loading screens, while previously it was just press any button. The crafting system is also rather shallow and simplified. Sure, it works for what it is, making decisions. Do I need the extra filters, or should I get myself some more medkits? But there was a missed opportunity to be able to have some crafting-only weapon modifications instead of just being able to craft ammo and supplies. And because of the open world design, even though there were rather few filters and medkits, relative to the size of the world of course, I still always had plenty, and making the decisions with crafting either of them never really had much weight because I always knew that I'd be able to find plenty of supplies. Fairly minor gripes, I know. Sorry, that was one of my more pedantic tangents. Let's get back on track. The shooting, as I previously mentioned, is as great as ever, but now you can customize your guns. And the customization system is actually pretty deep. And all this customization facilitates the new sandbox approach to level design, as you can customize your weapon to whichever playstyle you prefer. But just because Metro Exodus is a sandbox now, does not mean the developers have forgotten how to do linear environments either. The level design is still quite good. Loops back around on itself, nice interconnectivity, everything I ask for. In fact, some of my favorite parts in the game were in these rather linear places. 4A Games still remembers how to make an area densely packed with atmosphere, environmental storytelling, and frankly sheer terror sometimes. That friggin' whale, man, whose side is it on? It made traveling in the boat, which otherwise would have been incredibly boring, a tense experience. Although, that was probably because I played on Ranger mode and went rather long stretches without a checkpoint, and dying to that whale meant setting myself back up to 10 minutes sometimes. Exodus is also not easy on my mild arachnophobia. One of my favorite, and least favorite, moments in the entire game was descending into this weird compound or whatever to find it populated with super spider demons from hell. But seriously, the atmosphere in here, as usual, is top-notch. There's huge amounts of effort to make sure this bunker feels like it was abandoned, and then these spider demons came in and took it over for themselves. Which is kinda horrible. Walking into a literal spider's den has always been a nightmare of mine, and that feeling of intruding helps the horror massively, as it creates this feeling of unease, this tingle on your back that if you turn around, there'll be a spider right behind you. Sometimes in the gameplay I'm showing, you can see me being so freaked out that I barely even want to look at the spiders while I run away. Mentally scarring, it was brilliant. And despite the actual levels, like this bunker level I'm showing, being sort of linear and claustrophobic, the story really does feel like this massive globe-spanning adventure, with a good progression of difficulty and narrative stakes. I loved all the different vistas each season provided too. Winter, spring, summer, autumn, all were beautiful in a distinct way. It was great, and conveyed a huge sense that this was an actual journey, with progression in characters as well as time, and not just an excuse to visit a bunch of different locales, which it really was. But despite this massive adventure, Exodus never loses focus on what is one of the best aspects of the Metro universe. The characters, friends, enemies, and the like all leave a lasting impression. Honestly, I was even gonna make a joke here like, except for this guy, yeah, am I right? But I really cannot think of a guy that I forgot about, and I have the wiki open right now to check. But yeah, the main plot starts with a guy leaving Moscow and the Metro behind to try and re-establish society on the surface and clear Russia of the occupying forces that Colonel Miller warns Artyom about. The story is less about action, although there is plenty of that, and it's cool as hell, and more about going to a bunch of interesting locations and Artyom being rescued by characters with much more personality than he has, which is standard Metro stuff. The plot is mostly defined by its characters. And yet, despite that, one of the few people who really goes through any sort of arc is Artyom. I know, shocking, the guy that can't talk goes through an arc. Don't get me wrong, this isn't really a criticism. Everyone else feels like a character, but they don't usually do much. Aside from Demir and Alyosha, and they don't get much screen time. Oh yeah, and Colonel Miller does have a type of arc too. That's the only problem, I think personally, with Metro's story. It puts so much dang effort into all these characters and never really does anything with them, other than sticking you behind them during annoying gameplay sections reminiscent of Khan from Metro 2033. It's not nearly as bad as it was in 2033. But it is still quite annoying when it does happen, because the usual degree of freedom Exodus offers you due to its open world design is so harshly juxtaposed with the restrictive nature of follow the NPC to the thing and shoot bad guys at the thing. Other than that, the story is told quite well and delivers surprisingly potent emotional payoffs. Every trip through each location has you dealing with an interesting faction that all wants you dead. And I quite like what they did with the Colonel's character. He's still the gruff and tough commander, but we do get to see his softer side occasionally. My favorite line in the entire game was actually delivered by Colonel Miller. It was,
"Nothing to grow, radiation everywhere. What were we to do? Die like humans!"
in the bunker level. Which is a nice transition into talking about the actual levels. The detail and thought to make each location feel like a place people could actually live in is, as usual for a Metro game, incredible. There are, I believe, about 5 levels in this game. Moscow, the Volga, the Caspian, the Taiga, and the Dead City, and I think Yamantau too. Oops, miscounted. My personal favorite was the Dead City, but all these levels are fantastic. Diverse locations and interesting stories behind each of them. For example, the Caspian used to be a lake filled with a bunch of oil depositories, but then the nukes made it dried up and turned everything into desert, but left the oil mostly safe, which is why there are massive ships in the middle of a desert, and why the culture evolved the way it did. The people who became the slave masters were the ones with all the oil. They enslaved the natives in order to break down the metal ships to get scrap so they could build their fortress. And all the other levels have that quality of storytelling and thought put into them. It really adds to the atmosphere and visuals, which were already stunning. The graphics and massive size and scope of Metro Exodus really lets 4A games flex on practically every other game ever. And add some horrible new enemies. Not horrible bad, just horrible horrifying. I've now learned that things with teeth like this freak me out. Ugh. Everything about the Dead City was beautiful and haunting, from the drive to the Metro, to finding the remnants of a civil war, to getting the MacGuffin juice to cure Anna. For crying out loud, just look at this. I think that's what McDonald's puts in their burgers. And the stupid gorilla things, oh my god, they were so terrifying. Worse than the librarians, because they can speak. Right? They can speak? I mean, I think that was them talking and not just Artyom's radiation-filled brain. I don't know. They are horrifying, but they're fairly easy to evade and outrun, although knowing that doesn't ease the sheer terror you feel while doing it. And I have to wonder, did Metro Exodus pull a Pyramid Head and the gorillas are just physical manifestations of Artyom's guilt about his part of Anna's sickness? Or are they just weird, psychic, blind gorillas created by radiation? I'm probably just reading way too much into this, to be perfectly honest. So, yeah. That's Metro Exodus. Great high note for the Metro series to end on. It pushes boundaries with immersion and what games are capable of technically. A game that's great, but just escapes being a masterpiece. I'm glad that Metro didn't fall into the trap of the third in a trilogy always being the worst.